What happens when Hollywood's most volatile leading man steps onto a late-night stage designed for easy laughs only to turn it into a battlefield? Under the neon glow of Los Angeles, where laughter usually drowns out tension, a moment unfolded that no one in the audience or at home was prepared to witness. It was supposed to be routine. Another star promoting another film on Jimmy Kimmel Live. The cameras rolled, the band played, and the studio buzzed with the comforting rhythm of late-night television. The crowd had come expecting punchlines, banter, maybe a cheeky story about a disastrous audition. But when Tom Hardy sat opposite Jimmy Kimmel, something in the air shifted. Hardy didn't look like a man ready for jokes. Dressed in his trademark understated black, shoulders squared like a prize fighter, he radiated the kind of restrained energy that makes even silence feel dangerous. His reputation preceded him. A performer who doesn't just act but disappears into characters. A man celebrated for intensity, both on-screen and off. Hollywood's dark night of intensity. Now face-to-face with the king of late-night mischief. And then there was Jimmy, the comic tactician. A host who built his empire by disarming A-listers with wit, never afraid to poke, prod, or roast until his guests broke into laughter. He had sparred with presidents, clowned with pop stars, even turned awkward interviews into viral gold. But tonight, as the lights dimmed and the audience cheered, he misread his opponent. He thought Hardy would play along. What followed was not banter. It was not comedy. It was confrontation, raw, unscripted, and impossible to turn away from. Within minutes, laughter froze into silence. And what was meant to be light entertainment spiraled into one of the most brutal exchanges ever broadcast from a late-night stage. Because Tom Hardy wasn't there to be the punchline. He wasn't there to let his craft, his choices, or his integrity become the butt of a joke. And when Jimmy Kimmel tried, Hardy pushed back with the force of a man who's carried darkness in his roles and knew exactly how to wield it in real life. This wasn't a late-night chat. This was a duel. And only one man would leave with his power intact. The curtain lifted on familiar rhythm. Jimmy Kimmel, master of late-night charm, opened with the same weapon he always carried, a disarming grin. The crowd roared on cue as he welcomed his guest, leaning into the microphone with a kind of mock seriousness that always made the audience laugh before the punchline even landed. Tom Hardy, ladies and gentlemen, a man so intense his morning coffee probably files for a restraining order. The room erupted. Hardy gave the polite half-smile expected of him, dipping his head in acknowledgement. On the surface, it looked like any other night in the neon cathedral of late-night comedy. At first, Hardy played along. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely, the hint of amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. Kimmel riffed, tossing barbs about Hardy's brooding screen presence, his reputation for staying in character long after the camera stopped rolling. The audience ate it up. This was the game. The host teased. The actors smirked. Everyone laughed, and the machine of entertainment kept humming. But then Jimmy pivoted, and in that pivot the laughter faltered. So Tom Kimmel began, voice dipped in faux innocence. I've got to ask, you're famous for this whole method thing, disappearing into these dark characters. But as some people say, it's not exactly healthy, that maybe you're glamorizing dangerous behavior. Any truth to that? The audience chuckled lightly, unsure if it was still a joke or the beginning of something else. The punchline never came. Hardy's smile didn't vanish, but it stiffened too still, too sharp. The jaw flexed, the eyes narrowed just a fraction, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted. What had been late-night banter started to feel like an interrogation under bright lights. Kimmel leaned forward, sensing the change, but mistaking it for an opportunity. He doubled down, trying to cloak his question in humor. But the damage was done. The question wasn't funny. It was loaded. It wasn't a roast. It was an ambush. Hardy answered with silence first, letting it hang in the air like a blade. The laughter from the audience died in their throats. He tilted his head, studying Kimmel as if weighing whether this was ignorance, arrogance, or something far more deliberate. This was the moment the show cracked. The easy rhythm of late-night comedy collapsed under the weight of a man who refused to play along. The roast had become real. The lines between entertainment and confrontation blurred, and for the first time all night, Jimmy Kimmel looked like the punchline might be him. The silence broke like glass under the studio lights. Hardy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on Kimmel. Not the friendly, playful look of a guest indulging a host, but the piercing stare of a man demanding answers. "Jimmy," he said, his voice calm but heavy, "if we're going to talk about mental health, then let's actually talk. Don't hide behind jokes. Don't throw around accusations dressed up as comedy." The audience laughed nervously, unsure if Hardy was setting up his own punchline. Some clapped, thinking it was part of the show, but others shifted in their seats, sensing something sharp in the air, something that didn't belong to late-night television. Kimmel blinked, thrown off by the shift in tone. He chuckled, tried to wave it off. "Hey, come on, Tom. We're just having fun here. Don't be so serious." But Hardy didn't blink. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on Kimmel's with the kind of unflinching intensity that had unsettled villains on screen, and now a talk show host on live television. "You ask me if I glamorize dangerous behavior. That's not fun. That's not a joke. That's a claim. And if you're going to make it, Jimmy, you'd better explain exactly where it comes from." The crowd let out a collective murmur. A few laughed again, almost reflexively, clinging to the idea that this was still entertainment. But the laughter felt brittle, like glassware on the verge of shattering. The rhythm of late-night comedy, the playful jabs, the exaggerated reactions, the safety net of humor had vanished. In its place was tension so thick it pressed down on the room. For years, Jimmy Kimmel had controlled his stage with laughter. It was his shield, his sword, his way of keeping even the most intimidating guests on his turf. But Hardy had yanked that shield away in an instant. No smile, no smirk, no wink to the audience. Just cold, unyielding presence. The kind that made people lean in, even when they weren't sure they wanted to hear what came next. Kimmel tried again, forcing a chuckle. All right. Don't bite my head off. I mean, come on. You disappear into these roles. You live in the darkness for months at a time. Some people wonder if that's healthy. That's all." But Hardy wasn't letting him off the hook. "Some people who, Jimmy? Name them.
Quote them.
Tell me who said it and what exactly they've said. Otherwise, you're not asking a question. You're just repeating gossip." The weight of his words hung in the air. The audience sat frozen, caught between the instinct to laugh and the knowledge that they were watching something dangerously real. Kimmel shifted in his chair, the confidence of a seasoned entertainer slipping. His usual rhythm setup, punchline, applause had collapsed under Hardy's refusal to play along. For once, the laughs weren't coming to rescue him. This was where Hardy thrived. As a method actor, he had built a career on plunging into darkness, on embracing tension instead of dodging it. While other actors feared silence, Hardy wielded it. And now on live television, that skill became a weapon. Kimmel, the jester of late-night America, had stumbled into a duel he never wanted. And Hardy, the dark knight of Hollywood, had just removed his mask. Kimmel tried to reclaim the stage the only way he knew how, through laughter. He leaned back, raised his eyebrows in mock fear, and tossed out a punchline. "Wow, I think I just got method acted into submission. Somebody get this man a hug before he kills me with that stare." The audience chuckled, relieved to hear the familiar cadence of comedy return. But Hardy didn't crack, not even a flicker of a smile. He sat motionless, eyes still locked on the host, refusing to offer Jimmy the lifeline of shared humor. The laughter petered out quickly. Without Hardy's participation, the joke felt hollow, desperate. The silence that followed was heavier than the punchline itself. And then Hardy spoke. "You still haven't answered me. You mentioned some people. Who exactly? Quote me a name, a critic, an article. Don't hide behind generalities, Jimmy. Be specific." The tone wasn't theatrical. It wasn't angry. It was surgical, precise, deliberate, impossible to brush aside. Hardy had shifted the ground entirely. What was supposed to be a comedy segment now felt like sworn testimony under oath. Jimmy shuffled his notes, searching for a way back to his rhythm. Listen, Tom, I don't keep a Rolodex of angry critics in my pocket. You've been in interviews. You know how these things go. People talk. I'm just asking the question. But Hardy leaned closer, voice dropping lower, forcing the room to lean in with him. No, Jimmy, you're not asking a question. You're making a statement and pretending it's a question. There's a difference. You've just told millions of viewers that my work glamorizes dangerous behavior. That's not a setup for a joke. That's an accusation. Now, back it up. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some laughed nervously, as if Hardy's intensity had to be part of the act. Others sat stiff, eyes wide, realizing this was no routine bit. The divide in the crowd mirrored the divide on stage, comedy on one side, confrontation on the other. Kimmel's trademark smirk faltered. He tried again to diffuse. All right. Let's not turn this into a courtroom. This is a talk show, Tom. People want to laugh, not cross-examine. But Hardy pounced on the word courtroom. You're right, Jimmy. That's exactly what this feels like because you threw out a charge, and now you can't defend it. And in any real courtroom, that wouldn't fly. The air thickened. Crew members shifted nervously at the edges of the set, unsure whether to signal a commercial break or let the cameras keep rolling. The audience had stopped clapping altogether. They were no longer participants in a comedy show. They were witnesses to a public reckoning. Hardy sat back in his chair, folding his arms, but his eyes never left Kimmel. The message was clear. The burden of proof now sat squarely with the host. And for the first time all night, Jimmy Kimmel looked like the one on trial. Jimmy Kimmel was losing the beat. His usual cadence set up. Smirk. Punchline collapsed under the weight of Hardy's stare. The stack of blue cards in his hand suddenly felt like a burden, shuffling pointlessly as he tried to regain control. He forced a chuckle, but it rang hollow. Even the audience, trained to laugh on cue, stayed quiet. Hardy didn't move. He sat in a calculated stillness, letting the silence stretch until every eye in the studio was fixed on him. And then, with the kind of calm that cuts sharper than shouting, he spoke. This isn't comedy, Jimmy. This is gossip in disguise. The words hit like a hammer. The laughter that had fluttered at the edges of the room evaporated. The studio, usually a theater of easy entertainment, felt suddenly claustrophobic, like a courtroom where the defendant had been caught in a lie. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably, his grin twitching as if he couldn't decide whether to double down on humor or abandon it altogether. Come on, Tom. Let's not be so dramatic. We're just talking here. But Hardy leaned in, voice low, deliberate. No, you're not talking. You're insinuating. You threw out a claim about my work about mental health, and when I asked you to back it up, you couldn't. That's not conversation, Jimmy. That's character assassination, and you tried to slip it in under the laugh track. The audience stirred uneasily. A few people clapped almost involuntarily, as if Hardy had said what they were thinking, but were too afraid to voice. Others sat rigid, eyes darting between the host and the guest, unsure which side of history they were watching unfold. For years, Kimmel had thrived on this stage by making himself untouchable. Humor was his shield. If things got awkward, he cracked a joke. If a guest got tense, he leaned on irony, pulling the audience back to his side. But Hardy had stripped that away. He didn't laugh, didn't wink, didn't play. He forced Jimmy to face his words without the safety net of comedy. And now the power dynamic had inverted. The host, the man who controlled the lights, the cameras, the tempo of the show, looked like the one under cross-examination. Hardy had become the interrogator, and Kimmel, the defendant, fumbling for answers he didn't have. You can't just hide behind vague some people and call it journalism, Hardy continued, his voice steady, each word landing like a gavel strike. If you're going to accuse, you need evidence. Otherwise, all you've got is gossip. And gossip has no place on the stage or any stage pretending to have integrity. Jimmy's laugh broke mid-breath. It sounded nervous, strained. His trademark smirk had turned brittle, as though it might crack under pressure. He glanced at the audience, searching for their loyalty. But they were no longer with him. They weren't laughing. They weren't clapping. They were watching witnesses to a host unraveling in real time. In that moment, Hardy didn't look like a guest. He looked like a man delivering judgment. And Jimmy Kimmel, for the first time in his long career, looked like a man standing trial on his own stage. The room fractured. It started with a lone whistle, sharp and unexpected, slicing through the silence like a blade. Then a smattering of applause, hesitant at first, then louder, bolder, an eruption of support for Hardy's defiance. Others in the audience sat frozen, hands clasped in their laps, eyes wide, as though they'd wandered into the wrong kind of show. This wasn't a laughter-heavy playground of late-night television anymore. It was something rawer, heavier, a reckoning disguised as entertainment. Jimmy Kimmel tried to steady the ship. He shuffled his cards, tapped them on his desk, and plastered a grin that no longer convinced anyone. All right, he said, voice pitched higher than usual, betraying the tension clawing at him. Let's not scare the audience. We've had our serious moment. Let's move on to the fun stuff. But Hardy wasn't moving on. He leaned back, arms crossed, voice quiet, but unyielding. You don't get to accuse me on air and then skip to the funny segment. Not after what you just implied. The words landed with precision. The audience buzzed, some clapping in agreement, others gasping in disbelief. A handful still chuckled nervously, unwilling to let go of the idea that this was all part of some elaborate bit. But the longer Hardy held his ground, the clearer it became. This wasn't a joke. Kimmel's laugh faltered. He attempted a pivot. Come on, Tom. You know how TV works. We ask questions. Sometimes tough ones, sometimes playful ones. The audience loves a little controversy. It's all part of the game. Hardy's expression hardened. His voice sharpened, slicing through the facade. And that's the problem, Jimmy. You call it a game. You take people's reputations, their work, their struggles, and you spin them into controversy just to get a viral clip. That's not journalism. That's not comedy. That's exploitation. The audience shifted, some nodding, some squirming. It was no longer laughter they were reacting with. It was recognition. Hardy was saying aloud what so many suspected about late-night television, that beneath the jokes and the banter lurked a hunger for spectacle, for clicks, for ratings. Kimmel forced another grin, but it was stretched thin, almost painful. You're making this too serious. People just want to laugh. That's why they tune in. Hardy leaned forward, his tone low and deliberate. A teacher lecturing a student who refused to learn. People want honesty, Jimmy. They want integrity. And when they don't get it, when they see you turning gossip into entertainment, they stop trusting you. You think you're creating laughs, but what you're really creating is distrust. The whistle from earlier turned into cheers, now joined by clapping that rolled through the audience like a wave. Some stood emboldened, shouting Hardy's name as if they were rooting for him in a prize fight. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process that their safe, familiar late-night show had transformed into a public tribunal. In that moment, the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live didn't feel like a comedy stage anymore. It felt like a classroom, a courtroom, and a battlefield all at once. And Hardy, the supposed guest, had taken command of it. The lesson was simple, but devastating. Accountability doesn't stop at the punchline. And Jimmy Kimmel, caught in the glare of his own cameras, had just become the case study. Jimmy Kimmel had lost the room. The whistles and cheers for Hardy rolled like thunder, drowning out whatever fragile authority he had left. He shuffled his cards again, hands trembling just enough for the cameras to catch. His grin, once his greatest weapon, had withered into something brittle and transparent. And then came the words that sealed the night in infamy. Security. The audience gasped. Some laughed nervously, assuming it was a gag, part of the show. But the tone in Kimmel's voice wasn't playful. It wasn't scripted. It was desperate. 2 security guards began moving toward the stage. And for the first time in the history of Jimmy Kimmel Live, the neon backdrop of comedy became a stage for confrontation. The crowd fell silent, stunned into disbelief. This was late-night television, the domain of celebrity anecdotes and comedy sketches. Guests didn't get escorted off stage. Guests played along. But Tom Hardy was not playing. He rose slowly from his chair, deliberate in every motion, his presence towering even without a word. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't lunge toward anyone. He simply stood with the calm authority of a man who had already won. Turning from Kimmel, Hardy fixed his eyes on the camera, his voice measured and clear, carried across the hushed studio. "This," he said, "is what happens when comedy becomes gossip. When you trade truth for spectacle, when you ambush people not to have a conversation, but to create a headline." The words landed like a verdict. The audience silent, breath hung on every syllable. Hardy wasn't addressing Kimmel anymore. He was addressing the millions watching at home. Kimmel tried to cut in, voice cracking around the edges. "Tom, come on. Let's not make this bigger than it is." But Hardy didn't so much as glance at him. He lifted his chin, scanning the rows of frozen faces in the audience before delivering the final blow. "Remember this moment. Remember what you're watching. Because this is the face of entertainment when it forgets its responsibility." The guard stopped short, unsure whether to touch him. Hardy wasn't unruly, wasn't shouting, wasn't a threat. He was composed, in control, making the very idea of removing him look absurd. And then, without waiting for permission, Hardy stepped toward the exit. No rush, no fluster, just a steady stride past the cameras through the stunned silence of the crowd. The sound of his boots on the stage floor echoed louder than any applause. Kimmel sat frozen at his desk, papers in disarray, his signature grin gone entirely. For a man who built a career on controlling the chaos with humor, the loss of that control was absolute. He looked smaller somehow, cornered on his own stage, reduced from ringmaster to bystander in the space of minutes. The cameras lingered a beat too long, catching Hardy's back as he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the host stranded under the hot studio lights. The silence that followed was deafening. In a place built for laughter, Tom Hardy had left behind something else entirely. A moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered long after the jokes of that night had been forgotten. Jimmy Kimmel, once the master of the laugh track, had watched his stage become a courtroom, his authority collapse, and his legacy rewritten in real time. And Tom Hardy, walking off under his own power, had turned late-night television into a battlefield and won. The fallout was immediate. By sunrise, clips of Tom Hardy's walkout had flooded every corner of social media. Hashtags trended worldwide. Number Hardy v. Kimmel. Number accountability on air. Number not a game. Twitter feeds lit up with side-by-side gifs. Kimmel squirming behind his desk. Hardy staring down the camera like a general addressing his troops. Fans of Hardy rallied, hailing him as a modern gladiator who refused to let late-night spin reduce his craft to a punchline. Finally, one viral post declared, "A celebrity who didn't play the game." Meanwhile, Kimmel's supporters scrambled to defend him, painting the exchange as a misunderstanding and overreaction. An entertainer caught off guard. But the damage was done. The clip wasn't just viral, it was immortal. Hollywood insiders whispered about it over power lunches and studio calls. This wasn't Johnny Carson ribbing guests with gentle charm or Letterman needling stars with sly wit. This was something different. In an era where every segment is designed for YouTube clicks and TikTok shares, Hardy had ripped the mask off the process. He showed the audience not the show they were supposed to see, but the machinery behind it. The implications went beyond one interview. In the digital age, celebrities no longer rely on talk shows to control their narrative. They own their platforms, their voices, their reach. Hardy's defiance underscored the shift. Authenticity could outgun spin. Even on one of Hollywood's biggest stages, what unfolded that night wasn't just actor versus host. It was a culture clash. A symbolic battle between two forces. An A-lister who demanded integrity and a media machine built on manufactured controversy. And as the curtain closed on that unforgettable broadcast, one truth remained undeniable. Tom Hardy didn't just survive late-night television, he conquered.